Okay, welcome back, Poppets. We're going to go through the writing of it now. All right, so you should have at the very start of your page the issue statement to begin your introduction. The issue of whether or not social media companies should be, I can't even remember what it is, but anyway, should be held accountable for the addiction disorders encountered by users has been widely debated in recent Australian media. Okay. Then you want to have in there the author, title, date, publication, genre. So we go with Caleb Bonds, and this is all together. So we'll show you in a second. Caleb Bonds, opinion piece, opinion article, and we do the title. We have to do the full one. Meta and YouTube finally held responsible for addictive platform design published in Adelaide Now in conservative paper Adelaide Now. Like in conservative paper Adelaide Now, publishing 7 new paper on March 26, 2026. 26. Emphatically asserts that whilst big tech companies such as Meta asserts that whilst big tech companies such as Meta are at long last being made accountable for their addictive designs in social media apps. Apps that as a definitive, like by definition, as a definitive publisher, they should also be culpable for any comments, for any defamatory, which means negative, bad, mean about people, defamatory and harmful comments published on their platform. All right. Beaut. What we want to finish with is a little sentence that tells the assessor we understand the difference between a logical argument, an emotional argument, an educational argument, and even a problem solution based argument. Like, where somebody says, here's the issue, here's how to solve it in the one little section, which doesn't occur in here anyway. So we go back to our annotations and we go, right, how did this work? We started with the attacking of the opposition and sort of mocking them and condescendingly talking about them. Then we stated in a very diplomatic and balanced sort of way, very logical, that they had been held accountable. And then we go through the whole just in being, I would just go, that is them being, again, I would say informative in demonstrating their balance. Like, I see things from this side, but I see things from that side. And then they go on to being very passionate here, and there's very much an element of emotionality in this. But it's also got logic in it. And then it's very much very rational and logical at the end. So we want to state that Bond's piece opens with emotional appeals to the readership's sense of social justice for the little person, condemning big tech and reminding the reader of the real human face of addictive, the real human face of fatally addictive outcomes. Bond's piece transgresses through using educational and informative appeals to suggest his own balanced and credible perspective. However, he relies entirely upon logical appeals to finally hold big tech to the standards of all Australian publishers. All publishers worldwide, I should say, all publishers worldwide. Right, so that is my 2 sentences. I know it looks very long, but these are the things that we have to include these days. We have to show how this transgresses. There is the option that instead of putting this in your introduction, right, you can start each section with, Bond's piece opens with emotional appeals to the readership, and then go through those first sections. So I'll demonstrate how to do that too if you don't want to do that there, right? So this piece, this little section here, Bond's piece opens with emotional appeals to the readership's sense of social justice, the little person condemning big tech and reminding the reader that the real human face of fatally addictive outcomes. Bond's piece transgresses through educational informative appeals to suggest his own balanced and credible perspective. However, he relies entirely upon logical appeals to hold big tech to the standards of all publishers worldwide. Right? This whole section here that goes through how the argument is structured and how it progresses, you can section that up into the start of your 3 or 4 sections, right? As in, where I've written, Bond's piece opens with emotional appeals to the readership's sense of social justice for the little person, condemning big tech and reminding the reader of the real human face of fatally addictive outcomes. You can simply use that to start your next section, because you're going to be talking about how he does exactly that with these things here, right? And then when you go on to your next section, where he transgresses through educational informative appeals to suggest his balanced and credible perspective, bada bing, bada boom, that's what he's doing right there. And then, ends with very rational, logical appeal, bada bing, bada boom, that's what he's doing there. So I can actually start off your sections that way too, if you'd feel more comfortable doing that. In fact, that might work even better for you. It's entirely up to you. It doesn't matter how you do it. Some people like to just get that out of the way and go, tick, I have demonstrated that I understand how the argument has been structured and for what reason. Other people like to section it up within the body of their analysis. So if you were to start your next paragraph, or your next section, I should say, of analysis, remembering that we're going to be looking at the heading and this little bit first, right? We could start with Bond's piece opens with emotional appeals to the readership's sense of social justice for the little person, condemning big tech and reminding the reader for the real human face of fatally addictive outcomes. And then we would state what the mini argument is for here. All right. He initially utilizes the heading and his first elements of text to state that. Right. If you don't use Bond's piece opens with emotional appeals, blah, 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 if you want to keep that stuff here, right, then we just open with the mini argument, right, which is the Bond utilizes the heading and his opening text to, assert to the reader that, what did I say, big tech have previously avoided all responsibility for the adverse effects of social media on users. Right, and because we always open with the mini argument at the start of each section, the mini argument of the section before we start analysing the nitty-gritty of each section. So it is entirely up to you. You can I'll repeat this for you. You do your introduction, and you can finish your introduction with types of appeals that it starts with, has in the middle, and ends with. And then you would start each section with the mini argument of that section. Bond opens with his assertion that right? In the middle of Bond's piece, during the body of throughout the body of Bond's piece, he now asserts that and the mini argument. Anyway, we'll write through it. Or you can say he opens with this appeal and this reason, and this is the mini argument. Opens with this appeal and this reason, and this is the mini argument. Opens with this appeal and this reason, and this is the mini argument. Right? When that's not there. If that's there, then we just start with this is mini argument 1, this is mini argument 2, this is mini argument 3, this is mini argument 4. I hope that makes sense, and if it doesn't, just come and see me, but I hope that makes sense. All right, so we will start, because we've got it here. We've got everything that we need to show how the argument's structured, how it progresses, and why. I will start with the mini arguments for each section. So, Bond's initial assertions via his heading and text to mockingly convey. So I've tried to, this is how I try and incorporate tone, to mockingly convey, because he's mocking or condescending, mockingly convey big tech and convey big tech and inform the reader that Meta owns social media. Meta, and in brackets, owns social media platforms. Have previously avoided responsibility for the adverse effects of social media on users, and it is high time they were held accountable. Right? Mini argument. What's being said in that first section? So Bond's initial assertion via his heading and text to mockingly convey big tech and inform the reader that Meta, who owns social media platforms, have previously avoided responsibility for the adverse effects of social media on users, and it's high time they were held accountable. Then we need to actually say how he does that and what it does to the reader, right? So we always say, what's the mini argument? Is there a tone that it's presented in? And, all right, how is that being done? With what words, what evidence, what research? What's the evidence that he's done that? Quote it. And then what's that doing to the reader? So then we go, all right, we look through here and go, now on notice, right, which is a, cliched sort of metaphorical reference. I'd look at that. We've got finally and addictive in the heading. For 2 decades, throwing their hands in the air, protested, and it's just the poor sods and the rest of his stuff who do stupid stuff online. All right, so it's very, very mocking and condescending. So we'll start with the use of finally in addition to addiction in Bond's heading. Link both the long-term nature of avoiding culpability, both long-term nature of avoiding culpability and the consequences of and the consequences of their avoidance of punishment. The reader sees that it has been long awaited that big tech be held to account. And similarly, addiction serves to remind the reader of the adverse and ultimately potentially fatal outcomes of using social media apps. Thus encouraging them to look to big tech as potentially responsible for their own addictive issues. Similarly, the satirical and condescending references to Meta throwing their hands in the face of responsibility and poor sods coupled with stupid, indicates that users' naivety has been willfully taken advantage of. All right. Therefore, the reader is likely to reject the claim of big tech, seeing them as naive, poor sods, gullible and vulnerable to an app they knew was addictive. And similarly, Bond encourages reader frustration at learning this throwing of hands has continued on for 2 decades, further supplementing the use of finally in his heading. All right, I know that all sounds like blah, 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 blah. What I'm trying to show you there, quickly, is the start. So that's all that bit done. That's that bit done there, right? And I won't have time to tonight because I've actually got to go back to my kids. I won't have time to do the second section yet, but I'll post this so you guys can get your intro and your first section done, and then I'll come back and do second and third sections tomorrow. I'm coming back into work tomorrow anyway. I'm not here on Mondays and Tuesdays anymore. Remember, I'm here on Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, but I will be here tomorrow and Tuesday just because I was in hospital for almost 10 days in the end. So I didn't have time to get a lot of stuff done that I want to get done. So Bond's initial assertion via his heading and text mockingly convey big tech and inform the reader that Meta, who owns social media platforms, have previously avoided responsibility for the adverse effects of social media on users, and it is high time they were held accountable. Right? So that is the mini argument being made in that first yellow section, right? Then what I do next is I want to say, how does he make that argument? Using what words or what evidence? Like, how is that happening? So we have the use of finally in addition to addictive in Bond's heading. And then pink is always going to be what's it doing to the reader? So links both the long-term nature of avoiding culpability and the consequences of the avoidance of punishment. The reader sees that it has been a long awaited that big tech be held to account. And similarly, addiction serves to remind the reader of the adverse and ultimately potentially fatal outcomes of using social media. Right? Social media apps, thus encouraging them to look to big tech as potentially responsible for their own addictive issues. Note here how the effect on the reader, I'm giving a great deal of thought to the effects of the reader, like a lot of writing to the effect on the reader, because that's the most important part. They don't want to read a summary of what has been written. They've already read it. They don't need you to summarize what he writes about. They want this stuff. This is the original thought stuff. This is from your brain, right? Then we go to the next little bit, which is, again, what is he using? How's he doing it? So we have similarly, the satirical and condescending references to meta, throwing their hands in the face of responsibility, and poor sods coupled with stupid. Notice I'm just using the words that I need. I'm not even giving much context to them. Indicates that naivety, that uses naivety has been willfully taken advantage of. So, what is in there and why, and then what's happening to the reader. Therefore, the reader is likely to reject the claim of big tech seeing them as naive or poor sods and gullible and vulnerable to an app they knew was addictive. And similarly, Bond encourages reader frustration at I have no idea what I've written there, at leaving frustration at leaving this. Oh my God, so annoying. Stop. Why isn't it coming back on? Hang on. I need to go to the light. Swim for the light. Swim for the light. Reader frustration at leaving this throwing of hands has continued at learning. I got it in the end. At learning, this throwing of hands has continued on for 2 decades, further supplementing the use of finally in his heading. Further supplemented by the use of finally in his heading. Right? I want you guys to, yes, right. All of that, word for word, is absolutely fine, because I will set you up for the last paragraph where you have to do it yourself, right? The last paragraph, last section of writing, okay, with all the logical stuff at the end. But right now, the more that you do this and the more that you get used to doing this, where you've got what you need in the intro, the issue, who's it by, what's it published in, what's the date, the contention, and then, if you would like to, how the argument's structured and to what effect. Then when you start to your section, you go to the first section that you're analysing, which will always be the heading and, the start of the writing. You state what's the argument being made here, the mini argument, okay, because it's all to say that, yes, they've been held accountable. The whole contention is, great, they've been held accountable, awesome, but for having addictive platforms, but they also have to answer for more. They need to be held to the same laws as publishers, right? So every little one of these mini arguments helps build that contention and strengthen that contention. So every section will start with your mini argument, then your quoting of whatever you're quoting, whether it's language, evidence, facts, statistics, anecdotes, case studies, whatever they're using as their device, what it does to the reader, the next little bit of devices, what it does to the reader, and then you move on to the next section. And I always say, you don't have to use every device. Like, I would have loved to have gone I would look at now on notice, innocent facilitators, the word protested, but you know what? We've only got so much time. So I'm just going to use the ones that stand out to me, right? And you've got to do the same there. You've got to be really discerning, right? Because as you can see here, I've circled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then there's 8, 9 for that whole section. You'd have pages and pages of writing, right, for that first section. So no, you just pick out 2 or 3 that make the biggest impact and go with it. Anyway, I'm also going to make sure that I scan this to send to you as well, but I will upload this now, and then there will be a part C tomorrow. Bye.